the most fundamental female pornographic fantasy involves vampires, werewolves, pirates, surgeons, and billionaires. Dominant men who are capable of standing up to predators, who can be brought into an individual relationship. Okay, so that's the fundamental reproductive story meme that seems to drive women. It's allied with the hero myth. They're the different variants of the same story, the different sexual variants of the same story. And it seems to me it's not unreasonable to note that that's the fundamental story of humanity.
Women create or open up a frame for the masculine to respond to by acting within that frame. For example, let's say a woman feels the need for protection and provision unconsciously. And this desire manifests in the world as attraction to healthy, strong physiques, clever, intelligent, assertive, confident, courageous minds, men who are competent, right? Able to make good money and provide for a family, especially in business and career, right? As far as competence goes. But also the ability to protect, right? Something like guys who are good at judo, jiu-jitsu, mixed martial arts, right? That's attractive to a lot of women. Okay, so what is she going to do? She's going to act on this desire. Now remember, vampires, pirates, billionaires, werewolves. She's going to act on that desire, the desire revealed by those archetypes, by inviting, by setting this feminine frame, by encouraging men with those traits and abilities and positions in life, let's say, and discouraging men without them. In potential partners, she will actively pose the question, right? She'll pose the riddle, the challenge, through flirtation, body language, seduction, etc., right? Essentially offering the man an invitation, opening up an opportunity, right? Opening up that frame to prove himself in, essentially, right? Through word or deed or both. A space within which he can take action and meet the challenge properly, resulting in her receiving something, right? That may be an answer or a solution or an action, joining the opposites, let's say, right? And not just women, the feminine, right? This happens internally as well, in the interaction between the heart, the feminine, and the mind, the masculine. Biologically, the womb is a physical frame for the man's seed to take action in, joining the masculine and the feminine, right? The male and the female, to create an infant. Asking a question, posing the question, as Jonathan Pageau says, this opens up a space for logic to take action and provide an answer. It's often the posing of a riddle or a challenge, like the Sphinx guarding Thebes and asking a riddle, and you have to solve that riddle to enter through. If you don't solve the riddle, you're devoured, right? That's the kind of the shadow archetype, I guess you could say, of this particular pattern of the feminine. Again, this is an invitation for logic to take action and solve. In the case of a woman looking for a mate, it may look like flirtatious body language and other forms of communication, often very subtle communication, inviting male attention and action. Seduction typically involves a feminine setting of a psychological and emotional frame by inviting in a typically subtle question-like or riddle-like matter. Again, this is a space opened up as an invitation for the masculine to take action in and join with, right? Uniting masculine and feminine. It's often some form of chaos or potential offered to the masculine to plant the seed of his masculine reason, logic, in to take root in and bring order out of. Right. So an example would be something like my wife telling me that the sink is broken, the drain isn't draining, and posing the question, hey, what do you want to do about this? What should we do about this? And then I figure out a solution. By the way, the archetypal nagging wife is the unhealthy shadow version of this feminine pattern of posing the question, right? Setting the frame, presenting the problem to the masculine. A healthy version is what we see in the scriptures when Mary sets the frame for Christ's ministry, right? By presenting him with the problem, saying, we're out of wine. Intuition comes from the heart, which presents the riddle of a feeling, an emotion, a gut check sort of intuition to the mind, which must then interpret, solve, or answer using masculine logic. Right? Remember, the mind is the masculine, the heart is the feminine within an individual. This intuition is one of the forms of feminine wisdom that the early church and Carl Jung claim women have. Carl Jung said, "Woman, with her very dissimilar psychology, is and always has been a source of information about things for which a man has no eyes. She can be his inspiration. Her intuitive capacity, often superior to man's, can give him timely warning, and her feeling, always directed towards the personal, can show him ways which his own less personally accented feeling would never have discovered." All right. Today we're going to talk about the one thing Jordan Peterson and Dawkins finally agreed on in their recent conversation: the Baldwin Effect and the secret desires of the collective feminine. We'll watch the clip and then dig a bit into Jordan Peterson's classic insight into the vampires, werewolves, pirates, and billionaires that women fantasize about the most, apparently. We'll discuss the feminine needs those desires reveal and what masculine and feminine roles emerge as a result, right? Especially the roles of the masculine mind, right? The seat of logic, reason, and judgment, and the feminine heart, right? The seat of love, feminine wisdom, emotion, intuition, and more. All right, let's get to it.
I would even concede that an archetype might be a one way in which certain memes might spread more than others. It might be compatible with a Jungian archetype. So that's my answer to the question.
Let me ask you another question about that. Okay, so could you imagine a scenario where a meme had sufficient functional adaptive significance so that the individuals who acted it out gained a reproductive edge?
Yes.
Okay, so then you could imagine a situation where there was, I think I've got this right, a Baldwin effect
Yes.
between the meme and the genome.
Yes.
Okay, so then could you imagine an effect where the heroic hunters of the past who decided to cease acting like prey animals, maybe when they got rocks or sticks, were acting under the impulse that facing down the predator was the appropriate strategy? Because I was thinking about this reproductively. Like, you know that women are hypergamous. They like men cross-culturally about 4 years older than they are. The most fundamental female pornographic fantasy involves vampires, werewolves, pirates, surgeons, and billionaires. Dominant men who are capable of standing up to predators, who can be brought into an individual relationship. Okay, so that's the fundamental reproductive story meme that seems to drive women. It's allied with the hero myth. They're the different variants of the same story, the different sexual variants of the same story. And it seems to me it's not unreasonable to note that that's the fundamental story of humanity.
So that's Jordan Peterson's classic spiel on the biggest female sexual fantasies, which is fascinating in and of itself, but we can go a couple layers deeper here and reveal a critical feminine pattern every man and woman should know about for different reasons. But first, a quick quote from Carl Jung, who said, "The masculinity of the woman and the femininity of the man are inferior, and it is regrettable that the full value of their personalities should be contaminated by something that is less valuable." We have different strengths and weaknesses as men and women, right? The feminine mind is different from the masculine mind and vice versa, of course. When I talk about the patterns and the roles, just as a quick disclaimer, of the feminine and masculine, I'm not implying that all men should do this and all women should do that. You make that decision on your own. Of course, you don't need my help. But I am saying that it does appear that women want, and this is confirmed in numerous studies, by the way, not just this one that Peterson mentions. Women want 3 to 4 specific things in their mate. And this reveals a pattern. Mostly instinctually, probably, men collectively respond to these wants by striving to meet those needs, and collectively and individually. So let's talk about that. First, the reason these desires are so important is because it's the feminine that opens the frame, right? Creates the metaphysical, physical, and or psychological environment for men to take action within, for the masculine to take action within. And I'll explain that more in a moment, but let's take a closer look at these sexual fantasies really quickly here. These desires that meet or reveal feminine needs. So what do we have? We have the vampires and werewolves, right? That's one of the sexual fantasies, pirates and surgeons, and billionaires, right? These archetypal fantasies reveal 3 key sexual desires and relational desires, I guess you could call them, which are instrumental in the opening of the frame in this arena, as we'll soon see. So based on this, what do women unconsciously desire in a mate? The thing that we see in common in all of these, the pirate, the vampire, so on and so forth, is the ability to provide. They're wealthy across the board, pretty much, right? The vampires are typically upper class. They're wealthy. Werewolves are the one where it's like, maybe not so much, but pirates, certainly, right? They've got their booty, their gold. The surgeons are fairly well off typically, and billionaires are billionaires, right? So provision, competence, that's a marker of competence, riches, wealth. And the next thing is they are all at the top of the hierarchy in some way, right? They have power, right? They're at the top of the hierarchy, or in the case of the pirate, which is something like the archetype of the rebel, you have an individual who transcends the hierarchy almost, right? Or has created his own hierarchy. And then we have the apex predator, right? Each of these are at the top of the food chain. Most of them are monsters, right? They're actual literal killers. They're fighters or warriors, right? We see that in the vampire and werewolf, certainly, and we see that also in the pirate.
In the human society is that you have people who act out the appropriate meme, let's say, which is something like a meta strategy for dealing with predation. It's something like that. You can approximate that to a greater or lesser degree. The more you approximate that, the higher you are on the sexual selection, in the sexual selection hierarchy. And I think that's clear. Like, it's a bit more complicated than that, because women seem to be, the pornographic literature that women prefer is both the capacity to stand up against predation and maybe even to be a predator, but that has to be brought into alliance with the ability to make a intimate relationship and share. So it's like half monster, half cooperative distributor, cooperative generous distributor. It's something like that. You can see that's a real knife's edge evolutionarily, because you want someone who can keep the real monsters at bay. But if they're such a monster that they don't share and aren't generous and can't take care of their children, they're just another bloody predator.
Now, surgeons and millionaires, not quite so much, but you certainly on the surgeon's side of things, you have a very kind of an almost killer instinct, a very masculine position to be in. Like you're literally chopping people up, you're cutting into these bodies to save them. Not exactly the fighter, the warrior archetype, but something somewhat similar in a way. All right. Now, what about the needs? What needs do these desires reveal? We have the need for protection, the need for provision, and the need for security and perhaps even leadership of some form or another, right? On the traditional side of things, women with more traditional desires or wants, I think that aligns with very well.
And so I don't understand why you're not impressed by that.
We started talking about the Baldwin effect, and suddenly we got into women, what women like. I mean,
Well, the men who act out the heroic
Yes,
meme
yes.
are much more likely to reproduce.
It's an example, but perhaps we need to explain what the Baldwin
I was
effect
going to say that's probably helpful.
Yes, that would be useful.
Okay. It was suggested by Baldwin, I think in the late 19th century. It's a kind of genetic assimilation of a cultural or a learned idea. So the idea is that certain animals learn things, learn a clever trick. It might be nut cracking by chimpanzees, for example. And it perhaps spread as mimetically as an epidemic of copying. And that's known to have happened with the blue tits and great tits in Britain. Now, certain individuals are likely to learn it faster than others, and there may be genetic variation in the speed with which they learn it. And as the generations go by, natural selection would have favored speed of learning the new trick. And eventually they would have learned the new trick so fast, they didn't need to learn it at all.
Right.
It becomes genetically assimilated into the genome. That's the Baldwin effect.
Okay, I would say that's essentially the same pattern of archetype evolution that's implicit in the Jungian theoretical
Well, that's
model.
very interesting, because that suggests that Jungian archetypes might be genetically assimilated via the Baldwin effect.
Yes,
Now, that's a fascinating idea.
Yes. So imagine a meme develops, a representation, imaginal, and the people who embodied are more effective in dealing with predators. And then imagine that there's a concordance between that and the attractiveness of those males to women. Seems highly probable. Well, then you can see that because sexual selection is a pretty rapid mechanism, that Baldwin effect gets spinning
I totally
forward
agree
very
with that.
rapidly.
I've even suggested, actually, a slightly way out suggestion, that the human habit of standing on our hind legs, this sexually selected mimetic effect, could have been genetically assimilated and given rise to the genetic tendency to walk on our hind legs.
So
On average, how many women are going to say that they could care less about having a husband who is a good protector and provider and comes with, let's say, a secure, anxiety-free environment that he's created for his family? Let's talk about the pattern. The feminine mind naturally desires masculine protection, provision, security, and or leadership. And I say masculine there specifically because there are feminine forms of protection and provision as well, right? Just consider the womb itself is a protective bulwark, between the world of chaos outside and that little baby, that little joining of the masculine and feminine that is creating this new order, this new life. So there are masculine forms of protection and provision and feminine forms of protection and provision, but we won't go too deep there. The way that the feminine acts on those desires is by opening the frame or setting the frame, right? And this is something that Jordan Peterson discusses a bit. Jonathan Pageau much more, and Matthew Pageau. They've got some really great insights on this subject. And as far as further reading goes, I mean, there are a number of philosophers and theologians that really dig into this, but the best thing I could do is point to the early church, point to the church fathers, actually, the ones Carl Jung called the first great psychologists. And you could see that in their teachings on this related to opening the frame, the feminine opening of the frame. So what is this? What is the feminine pattern and role of setting the frame? This pattern is the superpower of the feminine, right? Whether we're talking about the feminine within each individual or the feminine in women who are typically, on average, more feminine than they are masculine. Carl Jung said, woman with her very dissimilar psychology is and always has been a source of information about things for which a man has no eyes. She can be his inspiration. Her intuitive capacity, often superior to man's, can give him timely warning, and her feeling, always directed towards the personal, can show him ways which his own less personally accented feeling would never have discovered. What Tacitus says about the Germanic women is exactly to the point in this respect. And in the sequel to this video, we're going to dig into that a bit more. We're going to go into what those Germanic tribes believed about the sacred and their women, their wives, their daughters, their sisters, and mothers. So, what does it mean to open the frame? With words, body language, action, and non-action, women create or open up a frame for the masculine to respond to by acting within that frame. And not just women, the feminine, right? This happens internally as well, in the interaction between the heart, the feminine, and the mind, the masculine. All right. So let's get into examples. And this is where it becomes increasingly clear what this is about. Okay, so the setting of the frame, the opening of the frame, this is the feminine creating an environment, right? Typically an encouraging, nurturing sort of environment, sometimes a physical environment, sometimes a metaphysical or emotional or psychological environment for the masculine to take root in, right? To take action in, to introduce the seed of logos, logic, order, to bring the proper balance, right? Joining heaven and earth, joining masculine and feminine. Biologically, the womb is a physical frame for the man's seed to take action in, joining the masculine and the feminine, right? The male and the female to create an infant. Asking a question, posing the question, as Jonathan Pageau says, this opens up a space for logic to take action and provide an answer. It's often the posing of a riddle or a challenge, like the Sphinx guarding Thebes and asking a riddle, and you have to solve that riddle to enter through. If you don't solve the riddle, you're devoured, right? That's the kind of the shadow archetype, I guess you could say, of this particular pattern of the feminine, something like that. Again, this is an invitation for logic to take action and solve. In the case of a woman looking for a mate, it may look like flirtatious body language and other forms of communication, often very subtle communication, inviting male attention and action. Seduction typically involves a feminine setting of a psychological and emotional frame by inviting in a typically subtle question-like or riddle-like matter. Again, this is a space opened up as an invitation for the masculine to take action in and join with, right? Uniting masculine and feminine. It's often some form of chaos or potential offered to the masculine to plant the seed of his masculine reason, logic, in to take root in and bring order out of.